This meeting is being recorded.
I am Anya Yavornitsa, sometimes called Snihova. Both my persona and family are Czech, and as my ancestors and relatives do, I tell stories. This tale is a legend of Old Prague, Old Town Prague, from many, many centuries ago. I was told this story when I visited Prague in 1992, although I remember my grandfather telling a similar tale when I was small. The places, the clock, the alchemists, the methods, the cookies, and the tools are all quite real from the end of the 16th century, although some of the designs that you'll see in the pictures are probably more modern than the story. But this is a story. Some of the wording is a little awkward in English, but I'm trying to keep to the conventions of the Czech oral folk tales. There are more pictures, links to more pages of Perník, shops, and even another version of the story on the page listed here. So, the tale of the Headless Gingerbread. In the time of Mad King Rudolph II, in the time when Zlata Ulice was full of alchemists making gold and diviners and other sorts of magicians, there lived a baker in Prague, a woman named Barushka. She made wonderful things. Her dumplings were so light that a breeze might blow them away, and bread so delicious that you would even want to eat the steam. Her noodles turned out tender, even if you overcooked them, and anyone else's would have been mush. Her little cakes called small boys from all over the city to gather outside the door of her bakery in hopes of even a spoiled one. But they were always disappointed, unless they had a penny, or it was a feast day when she made batches just for the reciting of a holy text. But Perník were her specialty. What are Perník? Why, they're a hard spice bread cookie, of course. Oh, nothing says Vesele Vánoce, Happy Christmas, like Perník, and no special day is complete without these special cakes. For First Communion, a little rope of dough folded like the arms of a child at prayer. For new mothers, a flower shape. For a hope of returned affection, a heart. For a birth, a cup. For a special child, a coiled bit of dough turned into a snail or snipped into a squirrel. For a seal business deal, ducati, shaped and stamped like coins with a gold foil top. But it is the holy days of the Christmas month when Perník flood the Christmas markets and spring forth on every table and are offered in every holy corner of every house. The baking begins as the harvest comes in, when there's grain and honey enough, and the traders have been bringing sugar and spices in the good weather. For Perník keep. If you have a good tight box with a wax seal, you can keep them through an entire winter, and a smart baker takes advantage of this to make plenty for the season of celebrations. So many are needed. Wreaths for each Sunday in Advent, molded cookies of the good saint for Mikuláš, the night of the good Saint Nicholas, and of the Sashak's bag that he pops bad children into, and the ducati that the Andělička, the good little angel that accompanies the saint, gives to good children. There are Perník that are hung on the green branches of trees in the house. There are the cookies for Little Christmas, the Epiphany, Trekrálu, the Day of the Three Good Kings, which in that day were beginning to be made into tiny houses. But most of all, there are the Perník that represent the Holy Family. Father Joseph, Mother Maria, and the baby, Ježulatko. Also sheep and shepherds, angels, cows, the little donkey for the mother to ride, and all the people of the town who come to see the new little one. All make a village in a home's holy corner to remind us of the great miracle. And Barushka made all of these. Her people seemed to walk on their own. The stars glittered and twinkled. Ducati shone in heaps. The sheep looked as though they could be sheared for their wool, and cows as though they would give milk. The little puppies and kittens that tumble in the straw of every table, everywhere, seemed as though if you but extended a hand, they would roll onto their backs and invite tummy rubs. The Holy Family, with the sweet smile of the mother, the protective stance of the father, spoke to the hearts of parents everywhere. So Barushka had a very successful year and decided to move her bakery closer to the Christmas market in the Stare Miesto Namisti, the Old Town Square. There was a building down the street from the corner of the house at the Bell that had once been the kitchen for a large inn, but had been sold separately when the decrepit inn itself was torn down for new houses. Barushka looked it over carefully. It had a room upstairs where she could live, several ovens, and a large cooking hearth besides, and it was good solid stone all around. So she purchased it. All during the spring, she cleaned and had workmen in to clean and examine the chimneys, remortar the solid steps to the upper floor, install good windows of glass with stout wooden shutters, lamps, and new doors. There were even stone sinks with a water fountain and a large cauldron nearby, so the cleanup would be simple. She had new work tables and tight wax seal boxes built in the early summer, then moved in and began learning her new equipment. By harvest, she was ready to begin the holiday baking. She started with hearts and stars and flowers, then went on to heaps and heaps of ducati, box after box of cookies stacked up. She went on to make sheep and cows and kittens, and then started on the figures of the townsfolk, the family, and the kings. But something strange began to happen. Barushka usually left at least one batch of Berenique to cool on the work tables when she went upstairs to sleep, all covered with cloths. But when she came down in the morning, the cloths were all rucked up, and not a single cookie had a head. The first time she figured she hadn't locked the doors properly. The second time that perhaps a window hadn't been closed. But when it happened again and she knew everything was locked up tight, she started to worry. Barushka first talked to her neighbors, asking if there was perhaps someone unreliable who might have come into her shop, or perhaps some lads who would think it was a fine joke. But they knew nothing. Next, she spoke to the watch to ask them to keep an eye on her shop, and spoke to some of the little boys that would come in on feast days for their special Berenique. But none of them had seen anything, and even watching for a week saw nothing disturbed, and so she fed them the spoiled cookies so they'd have a reason to keep watch. But none of the cookies that she left overnight had heads. Then she thought, well, the last batch I make tonight will be sashak bags, and see who can eat the heads off those. Barushka asked the priest to come and bless her shop, and still the cookies were headless. She was looking at her holiday season being ruined, and all the Berenique and hard work wasted if she couldn't figure out what was happening. So finally, she went up to Zlata Ulica, the golden street of the alchemists, and paid some of the king's diviners to come and see if they couldn't figure out what was happening. She had to pay them in Berenique too. They said there were spirits around the bakery, but they couldn't get rid of them. She would have to bargain with them herself. Well, on the night before All Souls' feast day, Barushka laid in plenty of wood by the hearth, made the chimney corner comfortable, and set a dark lantern with a thick candle on the bench beside her, and settled in to wait. The clock struck 6, the old town hall clock that sits across the square from the house at the Bell. It struck 7, and then 8 p.m., and she was yawning and nodding. It struck 9 and 10 and 11 p.m., and she never heard it, having dozed off after her long day's work. But then she slipped on the bench and woke herself and shook herself awake. She waited and heard the watch go by, crying the 1/2 past. Then bong, 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 the clock began the chime. And as she counted, she knew the midnight hour was near. It bonged 12 times. The rooster on the clock cried, "Kikiriki!" and she knew the hour had come. And then there was a light glimmering on the other side of the work table. It was a man and a woman, all dressed in houppelons, court clothes of a couple of centuries past, standing at the table and glowing in their own light. And the man reached out and moved the cover cloth, broke the head off a cookie, and ate it. Well, her words fell out of her head. They scattered across the floor, and she gaped at the silvery figures as they broke off more heads and ate them. What? She finally spluttered. What are you doing? The woman looked at her, popped another head into her mouth, and said, "We're eating Berenique, of course. Good cookies. But those are my baking, my life you're eating. You can't do that." The man ate the head off another cookie and said, "Well, we are, little mother. What do you think you can do about it? Very good baking, too. You do well." She spluttered for a bit and said, "Not enough well if my Berenique have no heads. Who will buy them then? And why are you eating my cookies and only the heads?" So they sighed and told her the story and kept on eating heads off the cookies. They had been young and foolish and fallen in love and started to meet for sheer friskiness in the inn. The innkeeper figured out what they were doing and threatened to tell their families unless they gave him extra money. They laughed and told him they did not care and they would not pay him extra. He was so angry that he took an axe and he cut off their heads the next time they were sleeping after their fun. He stripped their bodies and threw them in the street because they couldn't be identified that way. He sold their clothing in another city and buried their heads under the steps of the inn kitchen, building steps of stone to the second floor so that none would see what he had done. So you see, good baker, we have no heads and cannot go to either hell or purgatory without them. That innkeeper has long since gone to hell for our murder, although we must stay here. And he picked up another cookie and ate it. Barushka felt sorry for them. Not a lot because they were sinners, but they had paid far too high a price on earth for something that they would still pay for in purgatory if they ever got there. She asked, "Is there a way I can help you so you'll stop eating my Berenique?" "Well, if you find our heads to take to the priest so they can be buried in consecrated ground at last, we'll be able to leave the earth," the woman said. "I'll miss your good cookies, little mother, no matter whether I go to purgatory or hell," said the man. And the clock bonged again, and the rooster cried, and the spirits vanished. Barushka shook her head over the folly of the young and silly. But after she talked to the watch, she had workmen take out the steps, dig up the skulls, and rebuild the stair. She took the heads to the priest, and since she was willing to pay for a funeral mass, he buried them in the churchyard with an admonition to sinners all. Barushka felt sorry enough for the two that she also paid for masses for their souls, so that they would escape hell and go to purgatory, when in some eon they might be saved for heaven. Because she was a generous woman, and perhaps she had been young and foolish herself. And each All Souls Day, she baked Berenique in the shape of a young woman and man in houppelons, and gave them to the young and silly with the story of her headless gingerbread. She died a wealthy woman at a great age because of her charity, and I am sure that she was one of the saints that walked the steps to the pearly gates and didn't have to linger there, for even the angels loved Berenique. And still in Prague, on the Day of All Souls, you will see Berenique baked like hers, standing in the window of some bakeries, or leaned against the door in the memory of the spirits that loved Berenique. And I know this is a true tale, For I ate at her feast, drank at her table, and danced at her wedding. That's the end of my story. Thank you.